Hi, I'm Jalen Rose, and welcome to the Renaissance Man podcast, proudly presented by the New York Post, a show where we cover trends in fashion, entertainment, current events, and everything in between. My next guest is not only a chef, cookbook author, an Emmy-winning TV personality who won over audiences by competing on Top Chef. She didn't stop there. And Top Chef All-Stars before co-hosting the daytime talk show, The Chew. I'm hungry just saying it. She's always stood by her philosophy of cooking with love. And now she's launching a collection of kitchen and food items with QVC called Sweet Heritage by Carla Hall. It is my honor to welcome the talented Carla Hall to the Renaissance Man podcast.
Jalen, that was amazing. I feel like I want to take you around to introduce me and visit like gravitas. I'm like, yes. And I felt like coming out of that saying, yes, I'm Carla Hall.
Yes, and well deserved. And many congrats. How did your upbringing in Nashville shape who you are? And what are the foods you remember eating growing up?
So I grew up in Nashville. Just imagine the mid 60s. So I was born in 1964. And soul food, or the foods that I was eating at my grandmother's house, we went there every Sunday after church. My mother didn't cook. My mother made 5 things, and one of them was hamburger helper. One of them was meatloaf, which I love. Which I love. I love meatloaf. But I think the food and the time spent at both grandmothers' houses just truly influenced me in terms of my palate and the types of foods that I like, and the balance between like those pickles and savory and desserts like pound cake and chocolate layer cake and caramel cake and all of those things that I would have, and really great fried chicken that we didn't have all the time. That was absolutely a celebration dish. And so those are the foods that sort of are ingrained in me, and it's part of my heritage growing up. But I didn't appreciate them until much later in terms of a chef and wanting to incorporate those into what I do. I went to a French culinary school, and so I had to run away from it.
How much do you like or dislike every time somebody says Nashville, they bring up Elvis?
Yeah, and exactly, and it's so funny because he's in Memphis, and well, being from Tennessee, I'm like, that's 200 miles down the road in Memphis. But so Elvis has such a big personality, and Tennessee is a very long state. It's like 700 plus miles, right? And it's the ombre state. So Tennessee starts really white in East Tennessee, and then as it goes through Nashville, it gets a little mixed in. It got really black, except for Elvis. In Memphis. And then I feel like, right, it's the ombre state. So, and I think that he's such a big personality that, he sort of is like, oh, he's the Tennessee guy, but he's really, from Memphis. But that thinking about the ombre state and how much he took from the culture of Black people and the influence of Black people, it's like a shout out to the Black people, right, in Memphis, and that influence.
Absolutely. And can you please acknowledge some of those influences that he was able to draw from?
You have like Chubby Checkers. You have, I'm trying to think of some of the people. You have, oh my God, it escapes me because I'm going through menopause, and so everything is really new to me every now and then. I'm like, what's your name? What's your name? Oh, Mama. And I'm seeing the people's faces. You have, it just can't come to me. It won't come to me. It'll come like in the middle of our conversation. Like all of these, and even Black churches. He had a lot of influence from Black churches, being in Memphis.
So who are some of the artists you recall other than he listening to and enjoying, whether your parents were playing it, your grandmother, like you were listening? Who are some of the artists that also you were listening to?
So I remember as a kid loving Fats Domino. I don't know where that came from. I loved Fats Domino. My grandmother was listening to Nat King Cole. She was listening to, and I remember her going through the house, and my sister and I would, like, if she's singing a song like, ooh, and she'd have a cigarette hanging out of her mouth. I don't think my grandmother actually ever took a drag. She just had the
Cool
cigarette,
factor.
like a cool factor. So we were getting more smoke than she was, because it was just like, ooh. And my sister and I would be walking around the house talking about, yes, what do you want for dinner? And so, like, all of those albums. And actually, I still have some of the albums that my grandmother would play. And I remember my mom having, like, on Sundays, she would just have albums. She'd sit in the middle of the floor, and she would have these albums all around her, just, picking up like 70s and, picking up these albums and just playing. She loves music. And interestingly enough, a little thing about me, like, I love music. When the beat comes on, I'm like, yes, I want to dance. I want to dance. But I am like, I don't name that tune in a note. I might name that tune in an album. I am the worst. I am like the absolute worst. It's like, how many notes could you name that tune? I'm like, child, I need the song. I need the album.
The song's almost over.
Exactly. What's the next song that they're going to play that's going to give me a hint of who this is?
That reminds me a lot of my childhood, as somebody that was born in 73. Just on weekends in particular, the component set, the 33, the 45, and the thimble, all of the songs just embodied, it seemed like, what family meant. And food was a major part of that, because it seemed to be the labor of love in so many ways. When did you start to realize that you can turn your interest in food into something more?
Oh, this is going to surprise you, but it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s. So when I was cooking the food, I mean, when I graduated from college, I knew how to make one thing. I knew how to make, like, a chicken divine, where you take some cream of mushroom soup, you put a little sherry and some cayenne pepper in it. You had some chicken and some broccoli. You mix it up and put some cheese on top. Okay. So I was having that. And then when I left college, I tried to make a tomato soup, and I used 4 cans of tomato paste. Okay, that wasn't good. And and it wasn't until I left accounting, and then I was in Paris, and we were doing what felt to me like those Sunday suppers at my grandmother's house. This woman, Elaine Evans, would host these brunches, and all of these models would be there, and we would have these amazing brunches. It would be chicken wings, and if we found the turnip tops, we would have greens, and we'd have all these things, and macaroni and cheese. And I remember the girls talking about, oh my God, this macaroni and cheese is great. My mother would make it like this, and somebody else would chime in, well, my mother would make it like this. Child, I had that every Sunday, and I couldn't tell you the first thing about it. All I could tell you was how I felt when I ate it, right? Correct. And I was like, why don't I know these dishes? And that's when I started going to the American bookstore, buying cookbooks, and actually cooking. And cooking became an act of gratitude for me, where I was sort of making food for the people who were allowing me to sleep on their couch, And so I think for me, and it wasn't the food that I grew up on. It was things that I found in those cookbooks. So it might be soup, it might be, these quick breads. And that sort of led me to having a lunch delivery service.
Incredible. Did you have any chefs that were inspiring you during that time?
At the time, it was mainly my grandmother. I wasn't even watching Julia Childs on television. I did watch, oh God, what's his name? Woo-wee. This is what it's like. This is like we're talking to your mama.
You didn't know you was doing an interview with the Black Barbara Walters today, did you?
I Exactly. And I would call myself out because this is like when you're talking to your mama or your grandmama, and then they start at the end. They're like, "Child, I don't know your name," and they go through the whole list, But no, but the questions are great and valid. But it was, oh my God, like the Cajun chef. And because my dad watched him, and I see him in these old baggy jeans with the Justin, and he had the suspenders. So I would watch him occasionally, but I never really watched food television. So I didn't know chefs. I just knew the family members who cooked this food. So when I started cooking, even after I went to culinary school, I went to culinary school at 30. When I started cooking, the food that I was leaning into, that I was trying to remember eventually, was the food that I had from my grandmother's. And I didn't even have recipes. I was like, what did it taste like? Like, what did I feel like when I ate the food? And for me, it was probably really great that I didn't have these other people, because when I look at recipes and I'm trying to recreate something, it's an experience. I'm not just looking at a recipe and the pages of a recipe and intellectually try to recreate this. I'm trying to recreate how I felt when I ate the thing. So I actually probably would get closer to the feeling of the dish than if it was written down.
Totally makes sense. And there's an endurance to that journey as well, because now many people will see your success, but not understand some of the hardships that you've had to overcome. Can you tell me some of the things that were challenging in your career that you had to overcome, and what gave you the optimism that you can get through it all?
Okay, how much time do you have?
All day. All day.
So when I had the lunch delivery service, and I was living with my sister, and I was going door to door, hair salons, doctor's offices, barbershops. I would be that lady. Somebody would be peddling socks. I was peddling sandwiches. And I'm coming in and I'm like, hey, does anybody want lunch today? And I was making biscuits, and I worked, I'm telling you, I worked every single day for 5 years, every single day. And if I wasn't delivering, I was prepping the food. And I didn't understand how to prep like a lot of food for several days. So I was doing like only one day of prep for the next day. And then I went to culinary school. But during that time, and I was catering, and I would do an event, and somebody said, hey, do you want to do something for this government agency? And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, that's a great opportunity. Yes. And then you would do it, and I would scrape together all this money to do the event, and they wouldn't pay you for 30 or 60 days.
Oh, wow.
And I couldn't afford to wait for 30 or 60 days. Dude, I remember just crying. I was begging from Peter to pay Paul. I was like crying. I would call them like, when are you going to pay me? When are you going to pay me? Like, I remember standing in the shower crying because I needed the money to pay my bills. Like, am I going to lose my car? Am I going to, right? Like all of these things. As a matter of fact, at one point, and I'm talking about losing my car, that was later on, but I had bought a $200 mail truck that had one seat in it that I would put a cooler. So if you were working with me, if you were visiting me, you knew you were going to be making sandwiches. You knew that you were going to be sitting on that cooler in the mail truck, and we were going to be delivering those sandwiches. And so I did that for 5 years. And even when I started my catering company, again, because I think I'm a serial entrepreneur, and everybody's like, oh my God, that's amazing. And they see me now. But back then, I couldn't help but I was just working for myself. And I had to hire people. I hired people who were, it was from an organization called Jobs for the Homeless. These people sometimes had mental issues. And I remember inviting this lady to sleep with me because she was homeless. I'm like, hey, I have space. You can come and stay in my house. She couldn't stay in the house. I would wake up and find her outside on the porch because she didn't have the consciousness to stay inside, right? Wow. And that taught me something else. I mean, do I have the consciousness to grow, or do I have the consciousness to sort of stay in the struggle mode? So that was also something that I had to get over. So at the same time that I am working through, I met this girl and I started the spiritual journey of metaphysics. And so it was getting over this lack mentality. Because for me, I was always, once I got money, I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then all of a sudden I look up and I lost the money, and this is crazy cycle. I mean, on a much smaller scale, it's like when you hear somebody won the lottery and you look up 2 years later, they had lost it, right?
Correct.
Because you can't go from the mentality of not having money and all of a sudden having it and expecting to know what to do with it. So I had to go through that. And so just that was a journey. Eventually, even on the Chew, when you saw me on the Chew, I remember going to upfront. The Chew had just started. Now I'm on a national network. I'm on ABC. I'm on the Chew, and we had to go to LA for the upfronts. Now the Chew had just started. When I got there, I didn't have any money. And I had barely enough money on the card to check into the hotel. I had barely enough money to actually eat. And I remember being on the red carpet. We had 2 red carpets for this particular day. The first red carpet, people are talking to me, yada, yada, yada. I come back to a red carpet later, and the photographer said, you didn't change your clothes? And I'm like, no, this is the outfit I have. And it's just like, no one really thinks about that, the money that it takes, like the perception of being on television and having money. And I'm sure you've been through it also in sports, right? People assume that you have money. When they see you on television, they assume that you're getting paid when you're actually, you would pay them. I'm literally paying you to come because I have to put all the expenses to get there.
And
so
through that incredible journey of working nonstop, creating your entrepreneurial spirit, testing your faith, crying in the shower, how does it feel now that your goals are happening, but yet the best days are still in front of you?
Amazing. And, it's about gratitude. Just 2 days ago, somebody said to me, do you get to travel? She said, do you get to fly a lot? And I thought about that. And my first reaction was, I have to travel a lot. And before I even said it, I said, yeah, I get to travel because I get to go. I am asked to go to places where people are hiring me or working with brands or doing or going to the work. And she said, wow, that sounds like gratitude. And I said, exactly. I am grateful. And I had to fold that into, when I look back and I look at even like some of the things that I'm doing now and like working with QVC, I started this 4 years ago. And when people are like, oh my gosh, I remember you on Top Chef. Top Chef was 16 years ago. So if you're rewatching this show as if it was yesterday, that is 16 years of work and being here. And so when people come, how did you do it? How did you do it? I'm like, are you willing to work 5 years every single day, nonstop? Are you willing to not have money and not have exposure and not have social media and still do it anyway when no one sees you doing it? Are you willing to go in and you know that somebody is telling you that you are the weakest link of your cast members and you're willing to go back and say, hey, I'm going to pull myself up, even though nobody is actually helping me be my authentic self in this environment. And you have to figure out a way as a Black person with no Black producers, right? So all of those things. And I think for me, the one thing that has helped me is knowing that my lessons are only for me. So I look back at my lessons and the people, I don't tie my lessons to a person. If somebody's out there tripping me up, I'm like, okay, I guess I had to learn that lesson about how to fall and get back up. Because it is only a lesson with a name. And that is the thing that I take out of it. I have actually called people with some of my most challenging experiences, and I've called them years later and I said, you know what, I want to thank you. And why didn't you fire me? And what, you know what I mean? But I said, I want to thank you because I realized I can separate myself from the lesson to where I've gotten, because without that lesson, I wouldn't be here. And so I'm very appreciative of all of the steps that have taken me. And so I know with all of this information, I am going to go on to do other things.
Yes. And through those lessons, you are now using your kitchen collection as a vehicle with QVC to emphasize the importance of connecting through food, and embracing our heritage. And I'm very gracious that you're doing that. Thank you very much. Tell me about the ways that you honor your heritage through your work as well as your personal life.
So this journey to Sweet Heritage with QVC started with my cookbook, Soul Food, Every Day in Celebration. And I remember when I wanted to do that book, and I said, I thought I was going to do a baking cookbook. And I said to my literary agent, hey, I want to do this soul food cookbook. And she says to me, why would you want to do soul food? Because your fans are diverse. You have so many different fans. And I was like, wait a minute. If I was Chinese or Greek or Italian, would you say that to me if I wanted to do a Greek, Italian, or Chinese cookbook, right? No, you wouldn't. And so being a tourist, I doubled down. I said, okay, now I know if you're telling me no, that means yes.
I know my mother, my late mother, April 28th, Taurus the Bull.
Dude, so you understand. Contrary, and not contrary to a fault, but contrary. I feel that my stubbornness protects me. Yes. And so I could have all kind of mayhem going around me. If it's not gonna work for me, I'm not doing it. I don't care. I do not respond to peer pressure. I just don't, because I'm stubborn. But I realized the importance of the Soul Food Cookbook. And at the same time, I had been asked to be the culinary ambassador for the National Museum of African American History and Culture in DC. Incredible. And when I went there, I realized, oh my gosh, I have so much to be so proud of our history and so many things that I didn't know. And I said, this is the thing that has to be shared. And I said, if I don't know, that means a lot of people don't know. So I wanted to share our food. And in soul food, we tend to be stuck in all of these celebration dishes, macaroni and cheese, smothered pork chops, oxtails, right? Like all of that. And so I've spoken to Black people and they're like, oh yeah, I can't eat soul food because it's going to kill me. What other group, right? You know what I'm saying? Like
I've heard that. I've heard that too. It's fried food, too much cheese, too much cholesterol. All of that. There's so many different ways to break those misnomers. Please continue.
So, I mean, what other group or culture would actually dam up their own contributions in their culinary that contains so much of their history? And so I use the premise, if I go back to my ancestors, and I did African ancestry, and my people are the Yoruba people from Nigeria and the Bubi people from Bioko Island. So if I used my imagination and said, okay, if those ancestors came over today, how would they be cooking? And so they wouldn't be frying everything. They wouldn't be doing macaroni and cheese. And a lot of our food is from the culmination of different cultures, right? It's from Europeans, it's from Native Americans, and it's from Africa. But it would be those black-eyed peas, it would be those greens, it would be fufu or now corn because of the Native Americans, but it wouldn't be the food that we started doing once we became mobile. And so I started all of these other grains like millet and sorghum and fonio. And so I said, okay, if we know the celebration dishes, it is also my job to balance it with the everyday dishes because that's also soul food. And the soul food version that we've been selling and sort of taking as our own is such a small piece of who we are.
Right.
And so I said, I will get up on a soapbox and say, people, you don't know yourselves. If you can reject yourself, that means there's something else out there that you have to accept as part of who you are.
So you're in the kitchen, you're looking around. There has to be some essentials, some must-haves. So please, if you can, name your top 5 essential items everyone needs to have in the kitchen.
Okay, Jalen, I'm not saying everybody needs it, but if you're in my house, you need to get it from me if you see it's low on stock, okay? So, vinegar, because I love pickles. I love a good pucker. Vinegar, my grandmother always made pickles, like quick pickles, lemon. I love lemon. I love condiments. Condiments are my jam. So ketchup, hot sauce, yellow mustard, Dijon mustard, those condiments make a thing. I always have, I mean, I know I'm over five, so that condiments are one thing.
Yep.
I eat a lot of eggs. I love eggs. I don't care how you're making the eggs, boiled
Yeah.
eggs, scrambled eggs, omelet. I need eggs. And in the pantry, I'm going to do a pantry item, and I use chopped tomatoes a lot. So chopped tomatoes in it, like in stews and things like that. That was I could have gone on, but those are my top five.
That is great. That is great advice. And I also wanted to double down on that because you've been so successful and the sky's the limit about what you're still going to accomplish. You have so many people, in particular women, who have dreams of making it in the culinary world, whether it be opening their own restaurant or writing their own cookbook. What advice would you give them?
I think this is the thing that I tell people on the baking shows, and because I'm interacting with these bakers and they're like trying to go on, the one thing that I say, find out who you are. Because when you are training, as you're learning, you're imitating, because that's what you do. Because you don't know what you don't know. You don't have enough of like the alphabet. I mean, when you learn the alphabet, you just need to learn the alphabet, right? And then you are imitating, and then you are looking at others just to pull some things from different people. And it's not until you get to innovation, and that's who you are. Like when you bring your own self to, you're taking all of those pieces and you begin to innovate and finding out who you are. And what I would impress upon people, to use that information of culture. There's so much information of our culture that sometimes we push aside, and we push it aside because we take it for granted. Those things that you're taking for granted are probably your greatest assets. And when you can bring those things into your heart, that's when you're going to be successful. That's when you find out your food. That's when you're giving somebody something they can feel your love and heart. I feel like I'm a food whisperer. When I taste your food, I can taste your heart.
Wow.
Sometimes I taste people's food and I'll go to these restaurants and they're fine dining and everything. I'm like, oh, that's okay.
Yeah. Right.
I may be wowed intellectually, but I'm not moved emotionally. And so the meals that I remember are those that have some kind of connection to those people who were cooking the food. And that's the thing that I really try to get young cooks or people who are in this field to understand, because the intellectual cooks, which I call male energy, and it doesn't mean you have to be a male. It could be a female. You could be a woman with male energy.
Correct.
But the female energy is that of nurturing. And that is the energy that is bringing people together. That is that grandmother energy, that cooking with love, that really brings people together.
Make sure you guys get this kitchen collection, QVC, Sweet Heritage by the talented Carla Hall. But before I let you get out of here, I got a rapid fire segment called Gone in 60 Seconds. You ready to do this?
I'm ready to do it.
Oh, so we talked about eating at restaurants. We talked about tasting other people's cooking. What's your favorite meal to make for yourself?
I love the groundnut stew. Speaking of Ghana and speaking of West Africa, I love groundnut stew with hot water cornbread.
Ooh, that makes me want to just go back to Ghana. Ooh, I need that. And you funny you mentioned doing your heritage. I just actually did mine yesterday. Name a Black-owned restaurant people need to know about and why.
Oh my God. The first one that popped into my head, Tatiana by Kwame Nwachi in New York City. He just opened it. Not only is the food great, but it is such a vibe. And I have been to every single one of Kwame's restaurants. And this is the one that he has taken all of the hard knocks and all of the things, and he is in his soul right now. He is in his soul. When you eat that food, you're like, oh my God, yes. I'm telling you, it's right there by Lincoln Center.
Done and done, because I'll be in New York in the next couple of weeks. He's been on this show. I promised him I was going to come represent and get some of that good old-fashioned soul food. So I'm going to make sure I go represent. And I have to also ask you, what's a viral food trend that actually works?
The sheet pan meals work. Just taking a sheet pan, putting some chicken on it, putting some vegetables on it, tossing everything in oil. It absolutely works. There's yes, that's I'm gonna stop there because I was about to go with that spaghetti Alfredo that people are doing right now. It works, but you've got to strain that fat off that ground beef, child.
Tell them, preach to them, preach to them.
I mean, I'm looking at some of those videos. I'm like, oh, I'm getting a heart attack just watching the video. Okay, all right. These people trying to kill their followers. I said, okay.
So last but certainly not least, and again, Sweet Heritage QVC, Carla Hall, make sure y'all go support that kitchen collection. I have to ask you, what city and or restaurant you would say best embodies what you call our heritage?
Ooh, ooh, wow, you really went deep for that. All these challenging things that I've been trying to tell you about the music, and then come to me, and now you're going with that question. Okay, come on,
somewhere where we go and we get the full experience of our culture and our heritage in our own glory, the food, the ambiance.
I'm going to say, and the first name that came to my mind, New Orleans, and Dookie Chase. There are a couple of them. Oh my God! So Dookie Chase, and I feel like there's so much history that went through those doors. And I sat down with Miss Leah Chase months before she passed away, and she was still in the kitchen at 96, I think she was. Overseeing, and that family has managed to continue and talk about sweet heritage. When you can look at your heritage and you're bringing it through, and it's not fancy food, but when you go there, you get the vibe of like the elegance of Black people being one of the few restaurants that we could go to, and it still feels like that precious and that still laid back place today. And yes, yeah.
I will go visit. And I want to thank you for always cooking with love. That's Carla Hall, ladies and gentlemen.